exciting for me. Now, welcome. This is a bit of a special event, which you've been hearing from us and from me as well. So welcome to our first ever Adaptive Global Leaders and Super Teams webinar. Now, we've got so much great content for you today, and we've got an amazing cohort of 3 global experts and coaches that I'm going to be interviewing. And of course, none other than the fabulous Donna Ivey. And some of you have met Donna before, I know, because we've done a couple of lives on future of work and actually what that means and why it's important and why we're so obsessed about it. But for those of you who don't yet know Donna, or myself for that matter, my name's Alex. I'm the CEO of Financial Executive Women, and I'm here with Donna Ivey. And let me introduce Donna quickly. So Donna is the Academic and Creative Director of the Future Work Skills Academy. Her mission is to develop skill building programs and alliances with change makers to support organisations to shift their teams into 21st century models of work and learning. As Academic and Creative Director of the Academy, she spends her days designing learning experiences with a global alliance of skills experts, learning and cognitive scientists that are designed to unlock human potential. Donna Ivey, so good to have you here, as always.
Well, thank you. Well, that was a perfect introduction. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, for those of you who are tuning in, this is actually a first for us because it's our first ever collaboration with Future Work Skills Academy, and we are really pumped about this. And I think, as I said, if you read my email on the weekend, there's a few things that come across my desk and that I get really engaged in. I think we've got to do more and we've got to talk about this. And everything that's been happening, we all know we've been disrupted. Like every single one of us has been disrupted with what's happened in the last year, and of course still with this global pandemic. And I think there's a few of us, when I speak to leaders everywhere, there's a few still thinking when we go back to how it was, and guys, it's not going to happen. We're in this new state, in this new environment. And I just feel, Donna, that you and I have been talking about future work skills, about how I think, for individuals, we have to adapt. But when you've got the special privilege of being a leader of other human beings, you've also got to adapt as a leader, not just as a human. And so that got you and I talking. It led to a couple of lives around future work skills and what that means and why that's so important for leaders today, because we need different skills, I think, to thrive in the environment that's facing us. So let's you and I just, as you like to say, nerd out for a couple of minutes about why it's so important, why we're so, I wave my hands about, everyone knows this by now when I get excited. So why are we excited, and why do we think it was important enough to bring our amazing coaches together today to get into more depth about it?
Well, thank you very much for asking me to nerd out, because most people would run away from that invitation. Because it could be like hours. It's it's an unprecedented time that we're in. And I think that the challenge that you so beautifully articulated there about the fact that actually we're in it and our teams are in it at the same time. So we are experiencing this together, but all of us are on a different journey. And I think the challenge too is those constructs of 19th and 20th century work that we were so used to, that had been copied and pasted across the generations, was suddenly exploded overnight. And I think in the conversations I had around the world early last year, it all boiled down to a couple of things that were common. And one of the single most important things that I got out of that was that people had a struggle about their identity as it related to work. And I think that in addition to that, if you start taking your personal and work life and putting them together, and really I think we were very careful to construct work environments that were separate from home. And so many people had a code switch to fit into that work environment where it was very tightly controlled. And then suddenly you mix these things together. Our identity, it's not just about our work identity, but our home identity was shifting around at the same time. So there's lots of challenges around that. And some of the stuff about work, titles, your office where you sat, all that sort of stuff which we were so used to was gone. So I think there was a great deal of shock. But now that things have settled down, dust has settled, and we are addressing the unprecedented and the potential that it will not revert to normal. We have some challenges to face in how we bring people together reskill and upskill our workforce for this new environment. So that's why I'm so excited about this program.
Yeah, and there's so much to this. And everyone, thank you again for tuning in. This is why what we wanted to do today is to go a bit deeper. Again, we don't have long, but to go a bit deeper into actually uncovering some of the things that we're talking about. But before we bring the coaches in, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things, Donna, that you and I talk about quite a lot. One is this concept of going back to the status quo. And I think it's it's a good context setter for today. So all of us listening and tuning in, whether it's for yourself or for your teams, you know, as humans, I think you were sharing with me this morning in the car when we were both commuting about this fabulous podcast that you've been listening to, and actually talking about that humans want to go back to the status quo because that's what we know. But then what happens when the status quo isn't there anymore? And I think that's really worth just a minute or so to set the context for what we're going to be exploring today.
Yes, and that came from a book called Surveillance Capitalism, one of my favourite books, and it's by an author called Shoshana Zuboff. Now, it does relate to the extraction of personal data for manipulation of human beings for financial gain. And so quite a different topic, but she lays out the story of why we've allowed this to happen to ourselves, and she situates this around the concept of the unprecedented. And it was very interesting to me because she tells a story, lots of personal stories in this book. And the story was that she was sitting at home with her family and lightning struck the house and they could smell smoke. They thought, I better get out. So the kids and her husband got out. She thought, I have a bit of time. I might close a few doors, pick up some family photos. And as she was walking down the stairs, the fire department smashed through the door, grabbed her, pulled her out, and the house exploded. And so she was saying that what happened then was that she did not recognise. She had in her mind, there might be a bit of smoke damage. She didn't have in her mind that the house would be gone. And she said this, and these are her exact words. She said, I grasped what was happening through the lens of past experience, envisioning a distressing but ultimately manageable detour back to the status quo. And then she goes on to say how we can't adequately grasp our existing the unprecedented with the existing concepts, hence skills, behaviours and knowledge that we've had, because it's unprecedented. So it's a very different world, and I think that was a lovely story about how we all can fall into that, because she said human beings always want to go back to the status quo. It's natural for us.
Well, it's the comfort zone, isn't it? Thanks for sharing. I think that is a good context setter. So for all of you listening, I want you to be thinking about the reality of hybrid workforces, people everywhere, struggling with identity, how we work in this new environment. It's not going back to, I think, some of the structures that Donna said before. We've inherited, what the accepted norm is for working structures, and this is completely new. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our fabulous coaches, and then we're going to get into chatting to them. So first off, it is my absolute pleasure. Thanks, Jade. If you can put those up, great. So first off is Cecilio Mills, who is our coach around novel and adaptive thinking. So, and otherwise known, I should say, as CJ. So CJ is the Academy Skills Coach in novel and adaptive thinking. He's a lifelong learner and native of California. He has a broad skill set forged through engagements as diverse as Senior Program Manager for Nippon Telegraph and Telephone and IT Facilities Project Manager for Polycom and past President of California's largest Project Management Institute chapter. His consultancy, Creative Adaptive Thinking, works as a lab for startups with a focus on building agile and adaptive cultures that breed innovation. In 2011, he became a Golden Gloves boxing champion, and in 2012, he became a national tournament regional champion, participating in the Olympic trials. CJ also works with Soul Society, a non-profit organisation, to fight against poverty and provide youth with access to technology. Can't wait to chat to CJ. Next up, then we're going to be talking to Venessa Paech. Now, Venessa is the Academy's skill coach in community at work. She's a global authority on community management. She forged her career path leading community marketplace Envato, Senior Manager of Community and Content Strategy at the REA, which is therealestate.com.au, and Head of Community at Lonely Planet, where she managed the iconic travel community, The Thorn Tree. In 2015, she co-sponsored the inaugural Australian Community Manager Career Survey, and in 2016 launched the first Code of Ethics for Australian community managers with Alison Mitchell, CEO of Quip and co-founder of Swarm. Vanessa is a prolific writer, speaker, professor, and published academic. She is also a graduate of the New York Tisch School of the Arts, where she counts Al Gore and Spike Lee as fellow alumni. I cannot wait to chat to you as well, Vanessa. And then last but absolutely not least is Raj Jayaraja. Raj is one of the Academy's catalyst coaches. He's passionate about improving the business world one leader at a time. With experience leading teams in senior roles across the banking, energy and technology sectors and interviewing over 500 high-performance teams and leaders, Rajiv knows what it takes to create a high-performance team environment. He's the author of How to Grow Tall Poppies, which is a leader's guide to cultivating high-performance teams. Rajiv combines real-world experience with evidence-based coaching approaches as an International Coaching Federation certified coach to support leaders to maximize the potential of their teams through his company, Bear Inc. He has worked with, guided, and developed leaders in universities, technology firms, wine companies, startups, and small businesses. Raj, can't wait to talk to you as well. So everyone watching, we have a fabulous lineup. Let's bring you all in onto the virtual stage from the virtual backstage. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Hello, you three. Now, already thinking, gosh, we don't have enough time for so much interesting conversation that we're going to get into. So, for everyone watching, I'm going to ask the guys a couple of questions each, and then we're going to come back with some tips and a bit of more conversation. So, CJ, first of all, it'd be great for you to let everyone know where you're tuning in from.
I'm tuning in from the Bay Area, small town called Walnut Creek outside of San Francisco.
Welcome, mate. It's always good to have an international guest tuning in. So, mate, you and I were talking before today, and there are so many, I'm happy to say, there are so many big words that go with all things around, we throw around future work, adaptive thinking, all sorts of things. And you and I were chatting about how it's really great to, I think, just bring it back down, because I think for a lot of leaders in our community, we hear all these words. And I think, Vanessa, when we get to you, we're going to go, well, yeah, community, we hear community. So let's bring it right down and go back to basics. So let me ask you, what is adaptive thinking? I think it's a great place to start.
Well, let's start with the fact that most people are actually unaware that there's more than one way to think. So if you just look at it in simple terms, like it's either closed-minded or open-minded, closed thinking, open thinking, one of those two things, right? And there's everything in between those two. So most adaptive thinkers know that there's this range exists, and we can change our styles based on what's likely to promote the best outcome, depending on the conditions. So think of it this way. Closed minds typically will lack the freedom to diverge from their plans. They kind of close the door on alternative viewpoints or dissent, people that think differently. So eventually we get held back by this, right? We're limited by our biases and our fears of failure. Now, open minds, on the other hand, they're more free to explore, and we can make mistakes. We can find the answer, not just an answer. So it allows us to leave that door open so we consider how our own biases actually affect our behaviors and our decisions.
So I think a lot, and thank you, because I think a lot of us would be familiar as leaders to go, oh yeah, well, I've heard about closed and open-mindedness. Is this something I'm really keen to, well, there's a couple of things I want to know. So can you give us a bit more of a feel? Is this something, are you born? Is this inherent in you that you've got a closed mind or an open mind? Or is this something that you can learn? Because I think a lot of us, we probably in ourselves probably are aware of certain biases once we start to talk about it like this, but also we probably see it in maybe some of our team members. So I'm really curious, because it's easy, I think, to put a label on someone, oh yeah, they've got a closed mind or a fixed mindset or vice versa. So is this something that you can learn?
Absolutely, you can learn it. So most of us have a tendency to be open in certain scenarios and closed in other scenarios. And the key is just really knowing yourself, knowing your brain and understanding what that does to you, right? So you can sort of overcome those natural tendencies. So absolutely, you can learn it. There are not that many programs out there. We're one of the first to actually develop this with 4 years in the making. We continue to refine it at the moment. And so right now, being aware of those traits of adaptive thinkers is what's going to allow you to set some goals so that you can actually embrace these practices and get better at it. So you can learn it 100%.
So already, well, one, that's good news. And already I love that you're talking or you're using the P word, practice, because I think for a lot of us, you look at some of these skills, I think, and it can feel a bit overwhelming. Oh, can I ever learn it? I'm already too busy. It's hard. I'm old. Well, I'm not old. I'm getting wiser by the year. But, is this just for the younger kids that you can learn new skills? And I love that that's what you're saying, is that actually this is a practice. And I know you've got some brilliant tips for us a bit later. But so there's a couple of things that you said in there, which again, I think would be really great to explore a bit more. I think you said, once you become aware of the traits of adaptive leaders, so, or adaptive thinkers, sorry. So what are those traits? So if we're sitting there and we're in a team or whatever the environment is, what are some of those traits that we can see that adaptive thinkers are using, or that marks them out from the crowd?
Right. Well, so most adaptive thinkers are pretty good at thinking about asking better questions. It's something of the fact of, hey, do you feel good today? And that'll get you a yes or no answer versus, how is the way you feel today affecting your work, or you're affecting showing up and being present. So it's about asking better questions. Some of the other things that adapters thinkers do, they consider the viewpoints of other people. Right? We're not just sort of stuck and have yes men, but we want to make sure that we think about what might someone else do in this scenario, or what might someone else be thinking if they were on the other side. And the last thing, and one of the most important things that adaptive thinkers do, is they make sure to question, is my bias having an effect on how I'm thinking right now? Is it really limiting, my choices or my decisions? Or really, those traits are what adaptive thinkers are usually about.
Yeah, I love that, because you're talking, and I'm also hearing things like, wow, that's empathy for other people, that's curiosity, all these things. And it's interesting, isn't it? And this is, for all of you, I'm sure we'll talk there, because this is the thing, all of these, as everyone's listening will see, these are all so interconnected, right? So this is one of the things I think maybe in the past, or even, some business leaders would go, oh, this stuff is fluffy. It is so powerful, because we're learning to understand it's the awareness as well. The other thing I wanted to ask you, CJ, as well, you mentioned before, I think you said something about that as humans, this is about understanding how our brain works, right? And that as humans, we do have a natural tendency for closed thinking. So is that part of that, that fight or flight? Like, what is that means that's our bias, and we have to work to overcome and be aware of that bias?
Absolutely. It's sort of, if you think of, you probably heard the term the reptilian brain, and that's where we get that sort of flight or fright. So oftentimes if we're in situations that are either high stress or scenarios where we're not quite sure, limited information, ambiguous information, we tend to sort of fall back to the default. And that's what the default is. It's, what do I know? How quickly can I get to this answer? What's the shortest and the quickest way? That's what we want to avoid. Or at the very least, that's where we want to be aware of, am I thinking in that way? Because there are going to be times where you actually want to get to that quick answer, or you want to use that reptilian brain. So the key is understanding how you're thinking so that you can know when you need to flex back and forth.
So true, isn't it? And I mean, for all of us, what you've just described, CJ, I mean, if there was ever a situation in the world that would take us to that place and trying to work out where we are and control this situation and go right there, I mean, clearly we all have felt this and feeling this in different ways. Last question I've got for you, because I feel like, I've got, as always, 100 questions that I could ask you. But I think, again, let's distill this down for our audience. So our audience here is everyone from emerging leaders through to CEO, execs, big teams. So I think on one level, it's probably quite obvious what the benefits are. But then, let's not assume. Talk to us about, so, okay, we've talked about, our natural bent as human beings is for closed thinking. Awareness is such a big part of even being aware and what the traits are, and we can learn to be more adaptive. So let's talk in business context. I mean, what are the benefits if we can have humans and leaders and teams that are more adaptive and are learning this skill of adaptive thinking? What are some of the benefits?
Well, I'll say the first one is that once you understand how you think, immediately you're sort of on your way to becoming an adaptive thinker. And once you're at that point, that kind of grants you freedom to apply different thinking styles. Now you know, oh, I can be closed or I can be open, and you're not a prison to one or the other, right? You know, some people are just always open-minded and then they go to one place. So the benefit is allowing you the freedom to apply those, you know. And another one would be that knowing that you can control how you think is going to allow you to use full range of those styles, right? Get rid of the fear that we have, become open and free, right? That's going to allow you to go places that folks in either other situations or other teams just wouldn't, right? Because of fear or whatever. And now specifically, let's look at organizations, right? Because we can look at how those two things help people help organizations. But if we look at it from an organizational perspective, look at the sustained innovation that comes when folks are in this mindset, right? Look at how it cultivates more effective problem solving, or it fosters more of a holistic collaboration, not just we're working together because we must, but, oh, this is how you think. I thought something else, but let me hear what you've got to say. Oh, all right. If we add this piece, now the two of us made something better than we could have individually. And that's that type of collaboration and long-term, you know, sustained innovation that we need. And that's really the benefit that happens with organizations once they learn to, you know, sort of apply this methodology for all of their team members.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's such a great, it's a simple but I think quite profound explanation, because for all of us who've ever been in this position with teams, let's innovate more. I remember that was a catch cry. I won't name the organisation, but we need to innovate more. And we need to, but it's one thing, isn't it, to say it, and I can see you all nodding, but it's one thing to say that, and I know all of you amazing people who I can't see and I still miss seeing your faces. You know, it's one thing to say it, but then to do it. And I think you've so beautifully described that, CJ, because, you know, it's that moment as a team when you're hearing different viewpoints and you're actually hearing them and acknowledging, okay, well, that's different to what I was thinking, but now let's explore that. It's very different, isn't it, to saying, oh, yeah, okay, well, you've had your say, but this is what I think, and then let's kind of agree to disagree. And this is very real, isn't it? We're different humans coming together. So thanks, mate. We're going to come back to you later because I know you've got some amazing practical tips for us to apply literally from right now. So fascinating. Vanessa, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Now, I want to talk to you about this fluffy thing called community.
Yeah.
And obviously, well, and we have a bit of a joke about this for a couple of reasons. I think everyone agrees that, wow, community is so important. But I also think probably like a lot of the words we're talking about today, they can become overused. We hear them. Everything then becomes community. And I think, again, you know, if we can bring it back to, let's be you know, serious about business context here. Yes, community, beautiful thing. At the same time, I'm running a big business. I've got all these things. And I think where you and I started chatting, and I find it fascinating, is that, you know, what you talk about is community science. So I'd love to actually, again, like with CJ so beautifully did, let's just strip it right back and say, okay, talk to me about what community science is for a start.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. So community science is really the combination or the threading together of a number of other disciplines that's really happened in the last kind of 20 years or so in the digital age. It sort of pulls from psychology, anthropology, network science, social science. And what it helps us do is understand the building blocks of effective community. What are the defining characteristics of a community? How are they replicable? How are they measurable? And what benefits do they generate? It's being applied and has been applied in this digital age to all sorts of contexts, including many, many business contexts, to steer productive belonging, productive participation, collaboration around sort of shared context and shared purpose. And it's powerful because it focuses on those social infrastructures, which, as I said, are kind of definable, they're measurable, and we can really actually quantify the benefits. There are those intangible benefits as well, of course, which are incredibly powerful and transformative, but there are also very concrete, measurable benefits. Why it's useful for all of us is that it gives us a template to cultivating the conditions for community, which we can then apply to whatever our context is.
Okay, so that, I mean, right, so that's a great start, right? But again, I want to strip back another layer of the onion here. So help us understand, because again, look, I mean, this is the thing, which I think, CJ, you probably touched on, and Donna, you touched on as well, you know, this separation of, you know, life and business. Like, I don't reckon it ever. I still feel like that was the unicorn, right? Work-life balance, two separate things. Whole different webinar. But this separation that never really worked, and now it definitely doesn't work. So we are talking in the context of business and leaders and teams, but let's face it, we're talking about life here and humans. So with community, why is it? So let's just say I chuck together, and I'll simplify for the point of the example, but if I chuck together a group of people and we go, yep, so now I've got a globally dispersed team or a nationally dispersed team, or I've only ever led a team that was together in Melbourne or Sydney and maybe, someone in regional Victoria, but now literally we are almost ships in the night. We've got some people in shifts in the office, we've got some that are never in the office. We've opened the gateway because we can employ people that are geographically where we were never open to before. So this is my reality as a leader, right? And then now we're talking about things like connection and community, because we need that. And we're talking about trust and all these things that go with community. When you're talking about the science of this, it's just so fascinating. What are the hallmarks of, you see some leaders that pull everyone together and they all do their daily Zoom calls, but they're not a community, versus others that have got that indefinable, we're all saying that definable something that really gives that leader the template to create something cohesive. Can you talk to us a bit about like what is that thing that we need to be doing to really build a community that really thrives?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right. I think even now people think that if you just kind of glom a group of humans together, that they'll figure it out themselves, right? It's the if you build it, they will come paradox, which has never been true except in that beautiful film. There is labor, there is strategic labor that has to happen to create the condition set for community to form. And importantly, it's not something that can really work top down. It's polyarchical, it's not hierarchical, right? So there's shared power, shared participation. One of the things that it needs at its center really is a clarity of purpose. I think I've worked with a lot of clients, and I know you and Donna and our other coaches have seen businesses that are struggling in this distributed remote hybrid situation now, because they've found that it's kind of a rip the Band-Aid off moment for their culture in a way. They've realised that what they thought was maybe a very coherent, cohesive internal structure and purpose and reason for being was not perhaps to everybody, and that without that clarity, people really struggle when they are those lonely satellites in the night, as you said, Alex. So it forces a clarity of purpose. It forces you to hand over and distribute ownership of work product and relationships in important ways. And the condition sets that I mentioned, that the criteria around membership, trust, influence, agency, that we know and can prove make and build a successful community. There are ways that you can cultivate those mechanisms. And so when leaders are able to do that and empower their people to do that cultivation as well, you find that the condition set forms and community can form. And then, of course, it unlocks all of the business benefits. And just some of those business benefits, it's a powerful generator of collective intelligence and knowledge building. It can produce incredible communication and kind of operational efficiencies if it's well oiled. It obviously is a really powerful tool for culture setting. It's really the key to let you create a shared digital culture across myriad platforms and time zones and contexts. It also is very powerful as an intrinsic motivator for people. It can cultivate belonging. It can really speak to that identity conundrum that Donna spoke to earlier. It's like I said earlier, it's measurable, which is really nice. So there are concrete ways to know if these things are happening, if they're working, and the fact that they're compounding. One of the most powerful kind of testaments to community as a mechanism for designing an organization is that it's compounding in benefit, like interest. It's generative. A lot of other mechanisms kind of depreciate over time or are quite constrained. Community benefits in such a way that they build the more you do them, and more value is generated. So it's a really powerful way for an organization to reconstruct itself in this time of change.
I love that. There's so much to that. I mean, the things that, I mean, it all stands out, but the things, that are really standing out to me is what you said, one, this takes strategic work and strategic thinking. And, for all of you listening out there, I mean, we've been on this roller coaster, haven't we? I mean, remember back, dare I say, nearly a year ago to the day when, all this started happening, and it was that shift to the technology, right? We've got to mobilize teams out of a physical office, and everyone was set up with their tech. But I think we quite quickly found that when this wasn't unfortunately going to be a 2-week thing, and it was more ongoing, and it's so much more than the technology as a tool. It's exactly all the things that you're talking about, Venessa, about human interaction and trust and belonging and all those things. Very quickly before I let you go, and then I put Raj in the spotlight. I want to ask you a bit about, there's a word that I've heard, or a phrase that I've heard a lot recently, which is around, it's social cohesion. And I would like to just, unpick that just a little bit for the audience quickly, because again, in the context of what we're talking about for teams, and we're talking about culture setting and building cultures and all these things, what is social cohesion, especially in this context?
Yeah, no, it is a phrase being used more and more. I think that people have come to understand that, again, culture isn't, it's not the kind of sometimes performative trappings of work. It's not the free food and the ping pong tables. Sure, those are great if you've got them, but you can have that and have a very unhealthy, dysfunctional culture that has limited no social cohesion. Social cohesion is, about the state of relationships in your organization. Fundamentally, it is what is the quality of those relationships? What is the social density of those relationships? Is there, it describes ways of being and doing together, as a unit, as a group of humans, as a collective. Are those ways largely functional and harmonious? And by harmonious, I don't mean all the same. Of course, they're divergent. There's plenty of the adaptive thinking that CJ was talking about. But are they working in complement most of the time? If there are frictions, are they constructive or productive frictions rather than sort of toxic or problematic frictions? So. Are those ways of working kind of, smooth and operationalized? And what are the, if you think about community, what is the shared language of that group that we're talking about when we say social cohesion? Are there shared values, shared artifacts, shared ways of thinking and being and doing together? Those systems of communication and systems of identity, having enough harmony in those that we can all kind of work together and progress toward that shared purpose, that shared context along the way, and great leaders are able to identify and cultivate all of those facets I just spoke about, and animate and catalyze people in the direction of that shared purpose rather than getting in the weeds and the minutia.
Oh, so good. And I know you're going to have some great tips for us when we come back. But it's so interesting, because we all know the leaders who can do that, and it's like they've got this magic. There's something that they do that does exactly what you've just described. So thank you so much. Raj, over to you, my friend, and definitely last but definitely not least, welcome, and it's so great to have you here. Now, I think as with CJ and Venessa, I want to talk to you, first of all, I wanted to talk to you about coaching, because I think, like a lot of things that we hear a lot, words and phrases, you kind of go, oh, coaching. And I remember, back in my exec days, you think, oh yeah, well, everyone's a coach, kind of, why is that even important? So, and I thought, you and I were chatting about I completely believe in the value of coaching, and I want you to talk to us about, probably first of all, the role of the coach in this program. I think is really great, and the role, why is coaching important? What is it? Is a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, sure thing. Great to be here. I guess the first thing for me is, let me explain what coaching is. And I went on this journey back when I was in corporate as well. I think a lot of people mistake coaching as mentoring. So when you come to me, I give you the advice, I give you the answers, and then you go away and I go, high five, I've done my job as a coach. And it wasn't until I left that corporate environment, actually formally trained in coaching, where I realized coaching wasn't about giving advice. It's just actually about asking really powerful questions so people could tap into their inner resources and thinking and think differently, which then as a leader, that frees up a lot of your time. That's why that whole movement around leader as coach is really becoming popular now in a lot of organizations. Why it's important in this program, and what I love about this program, like you touched on, it's a real hybrid approach. because the coach's role in this program is really to take the participant from awareness to action. And what I mean by that is we've all been there. You go away to those conferences, off-site, your head fills with these amazing ideas and you go, this is great. You get back to your office environment and there's people, there's your team, there's workload, and you suffer what I call corporate amnesia. Those ideas just kind of disappear and you just don't get a chance to apply that in the workplace. And why I really love this program and how it's been designed with that hybrid approach is we specifically avoid that because we're taking International Coaching Federation certified coaches, so it's evidence-based coaching approaches, and then teaching them the subject matter. So they know the subject matter. And then what that means is we've got a highly targeted intervention around coaching for people, the participants that are going through this, so they can take those insights that they've had and that awareness and say, all right, given my specific work context, my situation, like CJ touched on, some of that mindset and that adaptability that I may or may not be going through or need to shift, how do I apply that learning then into my work context and achieve the goals that we need to achieve? And that's why that's so important in this program. I guess the question a lot of people are probably asking is, right, that all sounds really nice, sounds a little bit fluffy because we're talking about mindset, coaching, all that kind of stuff. Does it actually work? International research shows a hybrid approach like this, you're talking about a 41% increase in participants' performance in the workplace versus 12 to 20% if you just did a learning program or just a coaching program. So you're talking about a double the uplift by taking this hybrid approach that is being developed here, as opposed to doing a standard approach to, let's send a whole bunch of people off on a training course and fingers crossed and see if they can apply it when they get back to work.
Yeah, so familiar. Like I can feel your heads nodding out there when you're hearing all of this. And I love that you call that corporate amnesia. I've never called it that. I used to say it was the vortex, right? So you go off, you do this, and then you get sucked back into the vortex. And it was led by the inbox and email and back-to-back meetings, and there you go. And I think this is interesting because, like I said at the start, I knew that this is the whole point, right? Like all of your specialisms, it all interacts with each other because this is what we're faced with now, though. We're now in a more virtual and digital environment. It's easy to do the back-to-back than ever before, unfortunately. It's not the answer. And I think the tendency is to, because we're all so busy, there's this resistance to having to do more and to go off and just do something online. And you're right, it doesn't work. I'd love, Raj, can you go a bit deeper into that statistic? I find fascinating about why, the different results you get with a hybrid approach. Like, can you explain a bit more to us, like what is happening there? So is it because we all it's great to go off and do something and then we need a human to interact with and help us? Or like what is it that makes that such a different result in terms of being able to apply learnings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're spot on. It really takes that targeted intervention with another human that can really talk through your context. And in a safe and professional environment, you can talk about, here's my fears of probably going down a different approach, or here's a specific challenge I'm going to face because the system dynamics I operate in with this team or organization are over here and we need to shift over here. That's the kind of conversations we need to have. And then through the coaching process, you can talk about, let's come up with different approaches, different strategies that you might want to apply and bounce off the other people in the group as well. And then go, all right, we're now going to commit to applying that. It's such a tailored approach. You can't get that from just, reading a book or sitting in a program by itself. And then you're also committing to that coach to say, I'm going to do this. And next time when we meet in a week from now, 2 weeks from now, I'm going to tell you how it went. And we find that when people put that accountability out there, they're twice as likely to actually do it, as opposed to reading a book and going, I should do something about that. So that's really what's driven that impact.
There's no doubt, is there? When we've got someone that we're accountable to, this is kind of as old as time, but what you're talking about completely resonates because, again, it's the curse of busyness. So without someone that you're actually going to interact with another human about something and have that conversation, I just wanted to get a bit more from you because I think this is super important. I don't want to gloss over it because, again, for business leaders, like you're all talking to, we want to come back to what are the practical benefits here because, yes, sounds great. We know we're in unprecedented times, as Donna and I were talking about earlier. We know, I think instinctively, that there are different skills and behaviours that are needed to really thrive. And then I hear the but coming, and the but is always, yes, but Alex, we've got so much on. We're busier than ever before. I can't take my team out and bring them back in. And so the thing, and lose more time or put more pressure on people, and all those statements are true. So the thing I wanted to delve into a bit more with you, Raj, is, this concept of taking learning and applying it practically in flow, in the work environment, because I think this is not something that I had personally ever seen or experienced before. And I'd love your take on, one, how that works. How can we get our people who do this to actually apply this to real life problems and retain what they're learning, rather than kind of, as you said, go back to the corporate amnesia?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're spot on. It's the inflow and applying to work that then reinforces that learning for people. So it takes it from the theoretical to the practical. Then you learn and you're continuously improving, because you go, you know what, 80% of that application went well, but next time around, I might do A, B, and C slightly differently. Right? I'm going to try that the next time. And that's where the coaching really supports those conversations and brings that immediacy to it, because through this program, you are doing, like you talked about, the inflow learning. So it's not like you're going away for 2 days, jamming all in your head and then trying to remember the different bits. You're applying bits and pieces as you go, making those changes, making those tweaks, coming back, talking about how it went, learning from others, what worked, what didn't work, and then trying new approaches again. So you're constantly building on that learning, which is a completely different approach to our traditional go away, sit in a classroom or a conference or an offsite, write some notes and then try and apply 1 or 2 key takeaways. It's a completely different approach to what I've seen in the past, which is fantastic.
Which for me feels quite liberating, right? Because I remember being sent off to those conferences and then having to come back and write a paper to present to the executive about what happened. And it's like, it's so hard. And I love, again, I'll take you off the spotlight for a second after this, but you said right at the start about, the coach as leader. And I would like to just talk about that a bit more, because as you're talking then, for me, and you've all talked about it, CJ, you're talking about, questioning and curiosity and awareness. And Vanessa, you're talking about those leaders that are so, aware of the social cohesion in their teams and putting that together. And Raj, I think this is so important, isn't it? Because as you're describing the process of the inflow learning, what's in my mind is, wow, these are the leaders that you see, they're there and they know their job is not to do the do, as I've always said, but to actually play the role that you're describing. Is that hard? Leaders, we're talking about teams, but also us as leaders. Is this part of our development as leaders as well, to learn those skills and have the patience and to support our teams in that journey?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think as a leader, it's easy to think I need to know the answers and I need to be the one, and that's what leadership is. And I think it's critical that leaders go through this process as well and learn these new things, because then it will help you relate to your teams that are going through this, and also just foster an environment where everyone is learning together, and then you can all apply these changes at the same time.
I love that. All of you listening, if you've heard me before, I always say the day I actually had the confidence to say I don't know as a leader was like the best day ever. I was like, yes, I don't need to feel like I know the answer. But it's all the things we're talking about, isn't it? It's open-mindedness and awareness and adaptability. And I think a lot of this comes with, like you were saying, CJ, practicing these skills. We can change our behaviours. Thanks so much, Raj. So what I want to do now, everyone, I know there's been a download of really interesting information here. And again, we can never do justice, because we're talking big subjects here and we're distilling them into kind of 10 minutes each. But I just wanted to give all of you context about some of the things that we're doing in this program. Now, the thing I always love, and I think it's super important for anything like this, is if you literally walk away with one thing and then you apply it, to exactly our point now, Raj, if you can take one thing and apply it and then you retain it and you go, gosh, that was worth it just for that. They're the tips that I always love to give. And I know that's what I've asked all of you as well. I want the practical stuff that I can apply. So Vanessa, why don't we go to you first, mix it up a little. What's some tips for you? So, if we go back to, and again, this whole piece about community science, like it's strategic, it's long-term, it doesn't just click your fingers, but I know there are things that we can all do to actually start our journey around community. So give us some good practical tips.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the nice things about community, much like the coaching and the adaptive thinking that we've been talking about today, is it's not one of those big unwieldy transformation projects. It actually lives in the small moments. It's built through a series of small effort over time. So absolutely, you can go back to the office, this afternoon or tomorrow morning, whatever it is. And I say the office metaphorically, back to your working context, and try these things. So one of the first things I sometimes ask leaders to do is to think about, particularly if they are working with a distributed, remote, disparate team, think about how you would describe the structure of your virtual office at the moment. We don't want to get too caught up in structure, but put yourself in the shoes of a new employee or a new person that's working with you. If they were to arrive tomorrow, particularly if they're working remotely, how do they encounter your operation, your business, your culture? What is the structure of that environment? Is it 23 kind of disparate platforms with a million different things going on? Is there a journey that they progress through that isn't just in their inbox? How do they sort of find their way into who you are and what you do? So think about the structure of that, and go right away tomorrow and think about, are there places in that structure, zones that you can carve out for things that are not just busyness, not just busy work? Are there places that people can go to sort of have slower conversation, to build knowledge together? Are there places to socialize? Think of all the different types of behaviors you want to see in a healthy, vibrant culture. Have you created and held space for those in this new landscape, in this virtual hybrid office? If I want to go and brainstorm some things with somebody, do I need to go off into a private breakout room and do that? Can I do it publicly so we can all learn together? So what is the architecture of your virtual office? Go and just think about that, maybe even try to draw it out or map it. And at an even simpler level, and I know it sounds so simple, just start to have a conversation with your people and your leaders. Even if you're working with an extremely large organization, start to engage your people leaders around the needs and the feelings of people around their shared working life right now in this, the post-COVID world. So what is working? What do they feel is missing in that? Are they missing that face contact? If so, ask them what about it they're missing. Is it that sense of connection? Is it the chance to be social and sort of have some serendipity? Because there are other ways we can create and produce that. Have those conversations both privately, but also have them publicly. Have them in public forums, public avenues where everybody can know that we have permission to have these discussions, permissions to explore and experiment with this together, and you can start to surface sort of the zeitgeist of your organization in some new ways. When we put too much structure and sort of baggage around those feedback processes, sometimes they can backfire. We feel a bit surveilled. We're not really inclined to share how we really feel. So you role model the fact that we're able to have these conversations about culture and community and the way we relate to one another in a public arena, in a safe way, in a psychologically safe way. We can have them without bad things happening. We can entertain these conversations and start to learn from them. You can do those two things immediately, and you're on the way to kind of retooling your organization in a more relational, communal way.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a couple of things I took from that as well. And again, all of you listening can see this is so interrelated, because I think what we're saying here is if your role of leader is not doing everything and it's making space, right? And that it's making space for your people. And I love, one, everyone's going to be breathing a sigh of relief that this is not another massive transformational project, because no one needs any more. We've all got enough. But I also love, Vanessa, that you just said something there which was so beautiful about making space for slow conversations. And again, it's picking up on all these things we've been talking about. And CJ, we'll go to you next, around awareness of other people, empathy, social intelligence, putting yourself in other people's shoes, and those simple things that I think sometimes we dismiss in the busyness are so powerful about, as you said, building your organisation in that relational and communal way. So thank you so much. I think there's absolute gold there, and we can all take that away and as you say, do that. CJ, I'd love to come back to you. And so let's go back to this concept of adaptive thinking. And you really kicked it off today. I mean, you were talking about, curiosity and being open and aware. And one of the things that has so resonated with me is, again, there's simple but powerful things. The very act of asking yourself Am I being closed? Have I got a bias? Like even that question brings you right back, right? And that itself so powerful. But I know you've got some other brilliant tips. So for our awesome community who are listening, going, okay, well, this sounds really intriguing, but literally what can I do to develop that adaptive thinking? What have you got for us?
All right. So we started there, right? We started about being open. That is the start, by the way. The start is sort of like, what are my biases, right? Most people don't always take the time to sit and ask ourselves that question. So once you've gotten that part, now here's sort of two things, right? I already mentioned you can ask better questions. We sort of heard that. So the first one, we talked about considering the viewpoints of other people. That's the first thing that you can do, right? Really, our worldview is really like our cognitive orientation of who we are. And that sort of encompasses like all of our knowledge and what we've been through, right? So now if you can step outside of that and get into someone else's worldview, that is a really good practice, whether it's just a conversation, whether it's imagination, but that is a really good practice that sometimes we do it, we don't recognize it. So be very, explicit about it. And another thing I mentioned about, questioning if bias is sort of coloring your thinking, but what we really mean by that is if you really want to have yourself and as a leader and then impart this on your team so that they better innovate and discover more, then you need to teach yourself how to let go of your own preconceived notions, especially those where you think you know the answer. And you need to be able to transfer that to your team as well. That is what's also going to allow you to sort of get past your own biases, right? So those are the two tips that I really have for you right now. Just start considering other worldviews and then also start thinking about how your biases, sort of frame your thinking. And from there, you're going to be able to start to flex back and forth.
Do you know, I love that you're talking about that because it's so true, isn't it? And it's probably part of what you were saying earlier about our natural bias as humans to kind of put that defensive wall up to go, what do you mean bias? No, I am open, but once you get past that, and I think as you so beautifully said, it's sitting with that and asking yourself. And what I found as well, the more you practice even the art of asking yourself that question, even if you don't share that with anyone, you kind of break down those internally and go, okay, well, wow, I didn't realize that was a bias. And I think this is so much, as you said, like you've got to go through that, don't you, before you can actually then instill that in your team and your culture. You've got, as you said, it's the actions. And I love also, what I was thinking, as you were saying, understanding other people's worldview. We talk so much about inclusion and diversity. And for me, how you beautifully describe that then is, if you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes, how can we ever be inclusive and really celebrate diversity? Because we only have our own worldview, right? So thank you so much. I think there are a couple of brilliant, powerful, some introspective tips there, I think, everyone. I think that's something that we can all do on the commute between study and kitchen or wherever you're commuting to, but really start thinking about wow, how am I aware of this? So thank you, CJ. Raj, you've already given us some really great tips, but, some really practical tips from you, I think would be brilliant to round this out. What can we do as leaders, team members, that can really start to tap into the potential of ourselves and our other humans?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think you touched on it greatly at the start when you said, the last 12 months has been a real roller coaster for people and especially the leaders in organizations. And their role is to create, like you said, that space for conversations to occur. And unfortunately, some of those conversations can have a real emotional toll. And I think as a leader, you tend to take that on for your teams, for your people. And you've also gone through this past 12 months. It's been a real roller coaster for you. And depending on the organizational context you work in, you might not have brought that into that organizational context or that workspace or that team. So I guess my practical tip is first, after this call, take 10 minutes, give yourself permission to acknowledge that the last 12 months has been a real roller coaster. And then from a coaching perspective, reflect on that and reflect on what are some of the things that are your internal dialogue, I guess, that's going through your mind that might be preventing you from getting back to your peak performance that, if we say pre-COVID, what did that look like versus now? And write some of those things down, write down some of those limiting beliefs, write down some of those things that have crept into your mind. And then without judging it, just go, okay, what if I was to take a different approach? and think about that yourself. Maybe ask a trusted friend, colleague, find a mentor or a coach to have those conversations. Go, these are some things that creeped in. Here's some things I want to do and I want to practice. And back to that accountability, tell one person that these are things you're going to start doing differently in terms of your leadership and your approach. So then in a week from now, 2 weeks from now, you've done them, you can come back and have a conversation around how did that go? How did that feel? Reflect. And that's a key part of leader as coach, is building the time in to reflect on your behaviors, your team's behaviors, your internal dialogue, and say, what can we be doing differently? So I think the key takeaway here is give yourself permission to acknowledge that this has been a trying, difficult time, but that doesn't mean it has to keep going that way going forward. So have that permission to have that circuit breaker and reflect.
Thank you so much for making that your tip, because I know you've got so many, because I also know, and I'm sure, all of you, again, I can feel you nodding, because it is, very much I think our temptation as a leader to go, I'm here for everyone else, I'm just going to keep taking it, and everything goes out the window, which we've heard for years, right? Eating, all of that sort of stuff, exercise, all that sort of thing. And I love that this is the reminder, like if we're talking to high performance and you're saying, I don't have time, Alex, you don't understand. We do understand, you can only perform at your best when you fill your own cup. And I love that you're talking about that, Raj, and also, that time for reflection and okay, yes, it has been tough. This is the whole point, everyone. It's unprecedented. We've never been here before. So we need to give ourselves a break and have these conversations. So thank you so much, all of you. See, I always know when things are going to go fast and I feel like, God, but I've got pages of questions to ask. But thank you, all of you. It's been so much. Donna, I'm going to throw to you now, just in our last couple of minutes before we let everyone get to probably their next meeting. But I'd love to, can you just, for all our audience who's going, okay, well, this is really interesting, amazing content. What happens next? Like, what actually is the program? How is it structured? What does it practically look like for any of our leaders and teams out there who are thinking, actually, I'd really like to jump into this?
Thanks, Alex. I think you can imagine that it's unprecedented times require an unprecedented approach to building agency in people. So this program has a long time in the making, the design. CJ's mentioned 4 years for working on adaptive thinking. And fortunately, the Institute for the Future, who sort of kicked off our journey into the Future Work Skills Academy, had forecast this change. It's just through a different path. So their forecast was through technology, globalization, etc., not through the pandemic. Fortunately, we had put the effort into and the intention into the design of learning programs that would build the agency of people, and it's completely not the expected normal training program. So how does it work? A little bit of self-guided digital lessons, micro learning, spread throughout bit over weeks. In between a coaching session like Raj and his team of coaches, and what they do is to bring down the learning to personal circumstances and organisational circumstances. There's 5 of those, so they become your scaffold through that process, and that's very important. We found with these skills, because we've really lost a complete relationship with those skills. That are uniquely human, because we've really ignored them for the last 150 years. So getting people to understand the content, apply the content, is a critical way of building performance out of this program. And then in between that, lives like this with business leaders who model and represent how these concepts work successfully in a business environment. So that's the program. And it's in flow, not going off and coming back into the vortex and having the corporate amnesia. So it's a little bit paced out, and small moments, lives in the small moments, as Vanessa would say.
Small moments. And actually, I feel the pressure coming off going, okay, yep, that I can do. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our beautiful audience. I know you've all got to go. So I know, Jaden, you're going to put up a slide. So if you are interested and curious to know more, we are taking enrolments now. So our first cohort of this program is actually going to take off in early May, and we are limiting numbers to 30. We're doing that very deliberately and with intention, as Donna was just saying, because we know that's the way it works best. So we do have 30 seats, and actually where the places are already limited. So if you are interested, all you need to do is click on that link. I know Jaden and the team are putting the links in the chat function as well. So make sure you do register interest, because I know already we don't have many places left, but we'd love to see you in the program. It's super exciting. It's what 21st century leaders are doing. Thank you all for joining us, for all our fabulous coaches, CJ, Vanessa, and of course Raj, and of course you, Donna, as well. It's been such an interesting hour. I hope you've enjoyed it and got as much as I have from this. And don't forget, register now if you'd like to be part of this program. We'll be super thrilled to see you there. Thanks everyone, and have a great day, and I'll see you soon.